Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Today, we have a special budget workshop and a special call meeting, a board meeting, today being Thursday, May 26, 2022. Madam Secretary, would you do us the honor of calling roll?
Yes, sir. Ms. Becky Luna Chavez,
Present.
Mr. Overfeld,
Not here.
Ms. Gonzalez,
Here.
Mr. Mesa,
Here.
Mr. Galindo,
Present.
Ms. Haynes,
Here.
and myself. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Let the record show that we do have a quorum of board members, and that this meeting has been duly called in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Government Code, Chapter 551. This time, we will have opening ceremonies. First, with a moment of silence for the tragedy that occurred in Uvalde. Please stand. Thank you very much. This time we'll follow with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. This special budget workshop is the first, and I believe we'll have 2 or 3, Dr. Cruz.
Yes, sir.
The first one is today. We have a general fund budget workshop, and it's item 3. We'll start with that, and we will call on Amy. Dr. Cruz.
Mr. President, please, board, we would like to begin, immediately jump into the TASB salary study. Both of our consultants were caught in traffic, but I'm able to make the presentation so we don't lose time. And as soon as Luz Garcia from TASB shows up, I'll just ask her to continue. So if that's okay, Ms. Garcia, it's called up. I'll go down there from the podium and begin to make the presentation.
Okay. It's good.
Yeah. You're so.
Still my moment of glory.
I was gonna set the stuff right here and then I'll just touch on there.
Do you need another copy or this? We have it on here.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Okay.
perfect. I'll just walk through that. That's great. Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
That was beginning to slide. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I ran a little late, but I got here. I'm glad to be back. It's been, over 2 years? So it's great to be able to be on site and be able to see you guys. So good evening, Board President, Mr. Mesa, board members, and Dr. Rios. I am going to provide the overview of the pay maintenance review, and if you have questions, please let me know. So I'll go ahead and get started.
Louis, could you identify yourself for the benefit of new board members?
Okay, awesome. Sounds great. So my name is Luz Cadena, and I'm a senior compensation consultant with TASB. I've been with TASB for over 16 years doing this job, and prior to joining TASB, I was director of compensation for a good-sized district in the Austin area. So I've been doing this for a while and love it.
Awesome. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Great to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So go ahead and get started. We'll move to, hold on a second, I'll try not to. Yeah. There, I just have to get used to the little tab here. So we're going to start with the set of peer districts. These are the set of peer districts that we have used since we've been doing this peer review. I'm very blessed and grateful to have had the opportunity to work with the district for several years. And we've been doing this pay maintenance, and I think that we're going to see that we've made some very good strides with where the district stands in pay. We did have several districts that didn't participate in our salary survey this year. As you can see, they're the ones with the two little asterisk signs. And so one of them is Eagle Pass. The other one was East Central, South San Antonio ISD, and then Uvalde ISD did not participate in our salary survey, but we did get their teacher schedules, and so we are able to do the teacher schedule comparison. And then we have plenty of other data points for the comparisons of the other jobs, okay? All right, we're going to start with teachers and how they compare. But first, we're just going to briefly look at the distribution of the teacher experience. And so what we have here is really the graph that illustrates the teacher experience from 0 to 30 years and the count of teachers that each one of those columns represents. So you can see pretty much the number of teachers that you have at the 0 year through the 30-year mark. And then that line, the 50th percentile line that touches the blue column, that really just shows that half of your teachers, 50% of your teachers, have 10 years of experience or less, and the other half have more than 10 years of experience. So you have, a good distribution of experience with some veteran teachers in that 30-plus years. Another way to take a look at this is this pie chart, and it groups the experience, at least the count, by grouping of years. So we can see that for 0 years, you have 8%. That's only 47 out of the 603 teachers. But what I like to, what really stands out for this slide here is really you have almost an even distribution of teachers in the 1 to 5 years at 23%, 6 to 10 years at 20%, and then you've got the 15% and 22%, that's really 27% there in the 11 to 20 year mark. So it just confirms that you have experienced teachers. You don't have too many that are newbies, and so that's good to know. The next slide is now looking at how you compare to the market median salaries. And so the orange line is really the district's teacher hiring schedule at each of those 5-year benchmarks, 0, 5, 10, 15, and 20. The blue line is the market median. So it is the middlemost data point of that sorted list of peer districts that we just looked at. And, I think it's very notable to mention that the district for a long time had a very wide variance from the market median at the 5-year and the 10-year mark. And over the past several years, because of the administration, the board working diligently for the pay increases, we have begun to really narrow that variance. And so where we used to have, a really significant gap at that 5-year mark, we're closing that 5-year mark, that gap. So it's kind of delighted to see that. And then you can see that at the top end, at the 20-year mark, you're above the market median slightly. So, valuing your veteran teachers there. So on this next page, this is really, this table, this market table is the data that created that line graph, where you can see that the median in that one line item that's highlighted in blue, that's the median value. You can see also that median line in this sorted list of districts falls right above United and between United and Laredo. And that orange line is where you fall with your starting salary. So you've really moved up in the ranking as far as the starting teacher pay within this set of peer districts as well over time, since I've been working with the district, and so I was just like, this is kind of neat. The table, the way this table is, this market table is set up, is that the districts are sorted by the highest paying district at 0-year salary, which is Harlandale ISD, with a starting salary of $55,500 in the San Antonio area, to the lowest paying district at starting, which is Crystal City ISD with $44,000 starting salary. And then you can see that you fall right at the median starting salary value, 100% of market. 5-year mark, you're only 4% below market. And yes, it's below market, it's $2,200, but it's considerably less than it has been in the past. So then at 10-year, you're at 97%, $1,800 below. 15-year, you're at 98%, $1,085 below. At 20-year, as I mentioned, you were the line was just a little bit above because you're $295 above the median, but percentage-wise, it's 100% of market. And then average teacher overall, 95% comparison. That's driven by experience levels, and but what we really key in on is the comparison at each of those 5-year benchmarks. So you can also see that the district approved a 4% pay increase for this year. The median in your peer group was 3%. As I mentioned, we didn't have several districts that did not participate in our survey, so we didn't have what they provided as an increase. But the one district that gave a pay increase higher than what you did within this set of peers is Crystal City with a 7.7% pay increase. But they needed it, and you can see that they're still at the bottom in this sorted list of teacher pay. Okay. We also take a look at how you compete as far as your teaching area stipends from the master's degree stipend. You offer the master's degree subject area stipend of $1,500. The median is $2,000. There's 2 districts that offer that, and that median is $2,000. Then when we look at your secondary math and science, your stipend is $2,200. The median is $2,000, so you're right. You're slightly above that stipend there. And you continue to be above for the special education general resource, $2,000 stipend. The median, as you can see in that table below there, it's $1,500. So you're $500 above the median, and you can see that dollar difference from the median, that last line towards the bottom of that page. Now, for the self-contained, the median, we have seen this stipend actually increase, And more districts are offering the stipend for the high-needs classroom assignments. It's a little bit more challenging to recruit and find teachers to take those assignments. That stipend is $2,500. That's the median. Yours is $2,000. And then bilingual, yours is $500 above the median at $2,000, and that median is $1,500. And then with ESL general, you're $2,000. So really, when it comes to the teaching area stipends, you really are fairly close to those market median values, or may just be lagging slightly. But those are stipends that can be reviewed. We review them on an annual basis. And if you are still, having difficulties recruiting teachers with these specialized certification areas, then, consideration may be given for increasing the stipend. Any questions? Okay.
Yes. Luz, when you do these comparisons, this is before they do their budget, right? This is on the current year. Because most districts have not worked with a budget yet. They're in the process of holding the workshops.
That's right. So most districts, most of these peer districts are in the process, just like you are, in the budget preparation, budget consideration process. Some districts have actually already approved the pay increases. I don't have that information of just right on the top of my head, which districts within your peer group have actually approved pay increases already. But a large number of districts are still looking at numbers and determining, what they can do. We do know that there has been a push to provide a pay increase to employees, right? And to also make improvements in pay, starting rates of pay for the lowest level jobs, which are, your auxiliary and your clerical paraprofessional, because there's so many external pressures occurring from inflation, employee shortage, the economy, that kind of stuff. So that's across the state and even nationally. As
Yes.
we see that. But as far as like knowing exactly what these peers have already approved, I'd have to look into it.
Okay. Thank you for answering my question. And, I'm trying to be very creative this year. When I look at inflation, property values, and the such, that it's a very different year. I'm also looking at the past and saying, where have been the increases, and I feel like you that the hourly wage, with everything going up, and hourly wage is still quite low. We have not looked at the results, but I'm assuming it's still going to be low. And I will tell you this, I read the San Antonio paper every day. Most districts are being creative, and I'd like for us to see, I'm going to look at the results here and then
Well, you
see
can
how
kind of see.
this can be done.
Sounds good. There's lots of information and options
Thank you.
for the district to
But thank you for
consider.
answering my question.
All right, thank you. Good question. So all these comparisons are based on current market position for the 21-22 school year. And this is, the planning process for the 22-23 school year. And so market comparisons are current, but to this year. Ooh. Then oh gosh, I have a quick finger here. Okay. There. So then the teacher incentives, these are stipends or incentives that are paid for department chairs at the high school, middle school, elementary school. And you can see that your stipends really pretty much line up. They're a little bit more competitive for the middle school a little bit below for the elementary compared to the median. But districts, the practice that districts use for these incentives varies. Some also provide, they may have a lower stipend amount, but they may provide an additional planning period. Some pay a range of pay of that stipend based on the number of teachers that they kind of oversee. So it just, we generally just like to take a look at this so that you can have this information and not be too far away from what your peers are offering. I do want to point out that for signing bonus, next year we're expecting to see the signing bonus when the survey comes back in from districts, that more and more districts have probably used signing bonuses this year, and will probably continue to use them next year as a tool for recruitment because of the challenges that they're facing out there finding teachers. Okay, so you can see that we've got four districts within your peer group, and the median signing bonus stipend is $2,000. And then there's another incentive. This is San Angelo has this $4,000 incentive, and that's an additional signing bonus for the speech language, assistant speech language, $2,500 for speech language, $3,000 for the SLP, and $4,000 for bilingual certified teachers. So that's an additional incentive that they offer. So, just kind of an idea of what some of the other creative things that districts may be doing. Okay. Moving on. So we do have some options for consideration as far as teacher pay increase. The first one here is a 2%. This would equate to a $1,180 increase for all your teachers. And then there are some additional adjustments. As you recall, that 5-year benchmark is the one where we have the gap. We continue to have that gap. And so the adjustments that we have here are to target that specific area and to continue to narrow the gap where we have in that 5-year, kind of towards that 10-year mark. So that's where you see those additional adjustments, which then improve the district's position to, as you can see currently at that 5-year mark, you're at 96%, and then it takes you to 99% of market for that proposed 22-23 proposed new hire schedule at that 5-year mark. And then at that 10-year mark, you can see that the adjustments improve the district's pay to 99% current market. All of this is current market. And these will change because we know that districts will be giving pay increases. And then the very last column, it's just the experience differentials. We know that you don't give step increases, but it's they're logical differentiations for salary differences for teachers, so that a teacher with 4 years is making more than a teacher with 3 years. So there has to be some experience differential there as well. So that's Model 1, and then the it's touchy. I'm sorry. I'll get the hang of this. Okay. So yes. Is this the mouse that I can use? Thank you. Yes. Thank you. So the graph here, what I want to point out is this is what Model 1 would look like, given the current market position and where your current teacher hiring schedule is. So this graph, the blue line and the orange line, you already saw that was the first one. That's how you compare to the market median. The green dotted line is how the proposed Model 1 compares to the current market median and where you currently are within your hiring schedule. So it just kind of shows you the improvement there. Keep in mind, the districts, other districts will be moving as well. Then we have Model 2. This is a 2.5% increase. So the 2.5% is $1,500. I failed to mention that the way we calculate the percentage increase is we take the percentage and multiply it by the average teacher salary within your peer group, and that's how we arrive at the dollar value. In this case, it's $1,500. And then we continue on with the additional adjustments so that we can continue to close the gap at that 5 and 10-year position. And you can see that with this 2.5% model, you're at 100% of current market at 5, 10, 15, and then at the 20-year mark, you're 2% above. The starting salary is $51,500 with this model here. And so how this would look is you can see that this model is really more connected to the market median value across those 5-year benchmarks. And so it just brings you up closer to that current market median. Then Model 3, this is a little bit more robust. This is a 3.1% general pay increase. It equates to a $1,800 increase for all your continuing teachers. And then we continue with those additional adjustments just to make sure that we continue to narrow that gap. It has a starting salary of $51,750. And then on this page 14, you can see that we really are sitting right at that market median value with Model 3, knowing that districts are very likely going to give anywhere between a 2% and a 3%, but we have had districts give more than that. We've had districts, you know, I was just at a board meeting Tuesday in the El Paso area, and one district gave a 3%. We've got another one that's considering a 4%. One wants to, the board is considering a 6%, and then, you know, we've got districts all over giving, you know, pay increases. Some are not able to do that, and, you know, they're being conservative and staying within the 2%, but we do have pay increases that are being approved. Any questions with teachers? And I'll move on to the administrative professional group.
Yes. Luis, in the past, I've seen whole numbers like 2%, 3%. Is there a reason we did 2.5, 3.1?
Yeah, I mean, so I offered the 2%, right, and then the 2.5%. The 3.1% is just so that we can get to an $1,800 value. I don't like $1,793.
Okay.
To me, it's like marketing, right? You're if you tell somebody we've given you $1,800 versus $1,793, $1,800 means a whole lot more. So
Rounded to the
that's-
nearest hundred. Okay. All right.
Okay, so that's why it was 3.1. Okay, administrative professional. So when we do the comparisons, when we look at the comparison of pay for administrative professionals, we can see that overall pay is within 10% of the market, meaning that jobs are clustered around 10%, from 90% market position to 110 market position, with the exception of one job, that's the director of CTE. And this market position can be appropriate because it could be that somebody is experienced, has years, is a veteran in the job, and so that may be very appropriate. But what we don't want to see is someone whose pay is more than 10% below market, and they've been in a job for a long time, right? Because they should be at least within a 10% variance of pay. If they're new to the job and they're more than 10% below, that may be appropriate. But there are some jobs that you have to be more competitive with. A high school principal, even though they may have low experience, you're going to have to pay that individual competitively, and 10%, being more than 10% below market, even though they may have few years, may not get you that candidate, right? There are some critical key positions where you have to be more competitive with. But for this group overall, within 10% of market for this benchmarks, with the one exception that I mentioned. Now, I do want to clarify that while we consider within 10% of market to be within that competitive range of pay, when it comes to teacher pay has to be as close to market as possible, because the teacher schedule is your hiring schedule. That's the schedule. So teacher pay is a little bit different in that each of those 5-year benchmarks is kind of like a little mini midpoint that we connect. And so when we take a look at the market shortly here in the next slide, I'll kind of clarify where that connection comes in. But definitely teacher pay we do not consider teacher pay, if it's within 10% of market, to be competitive at all, okay? The next market comparison, is the campus administration and counselors. And as you can see here, your campus administration and counselors are paid within 10% of market. You have assistant principal at the one middle school and counselor high school, 13% and 12% above market respectively. But it could be that they've been in the job, and so it's not that that's not appropriate. There are reasons why pay may be above market, and it's good to know that. But overall, pays within that 10% of market for this group. Then for your professional category, so this group, we're talking about the nurse and your technology director, your network administrator, DIAG, payroll supervisor. You can see that all of these positions are within 10% of market. What I want to make sure that I point out is that anything that is to the right of that 0% down at the bottom, that indicates that that's 100% of market. So anything that's to the right of that is above market, right? Anything that's to the left of that 0 is below market. But then again, the dark blue is identifying all those jobs that are within that 10% variance of pay. And then the light blue identifies the jobs that are more than 10% outside the variance of pay, above or below 100% of market. Any questions here? And I can move on to the paraprofessional. So we're going to look at the clerical and technical jobs. And so for this group, you can see that we begin to see, more jobs that are in that more than 10% below market variance. Those light blue at the bottom there, so we have 3, 6, 7 positions listed there that we have anywhere from 18% below market to 12% below market. HR specialist, 18% below, and then your principal, elementary school secretary, 12% below. And then you've got jobs up at the top, high school registrar, 19% above. Your attendance middle school secretary, 17% above, and then central office reception at 17% above. Keep in mind, some of these above market positions, you have some very veteran employees. You've got employees that have been with you for a very long time, and so their pay is going to be above market, and that's Yeah, it is what it is. They've been with you for a long time. The ones that are below market, some may be fairly new. I know that we've had, at least as we've worked with districts, there's been a huge change and increase in turnover of jobs, right? Everybody is poaching employees because they can't find them. And so everybody's trying to take and find an employee. And so some may be new. That may be the reason why the pay may be below market. But we do have some recommendations for improving pay and starting rates of pay. So that may address that as well.
Sorry, I have a question. Luce, in the past, when the board agrees on the compensation, whether it's whatever percentage it is, we've adjusted for the individuals that are more than 10% below market.
Mm-hmm.
So the analysis that you provide for the total cost of a 2.5, or 3.1 salary increase, does that already include the adjustment?
Yes.
To bring those that are below market to at least 10%?
It's an adjustment that helps move them through the range a little bit more, but it's not an adjustment that moves them up to 90%, to within that 90% of market, for the mere reason that their experience level may not be as much as someone else that's in that job. And so we don't want to leapfrog those that have less experience over more experienced individuals. But we do target additional adjustments for employees that continue to be more than 90% below the new range midpoint values. And we typically add an additional 1% of midpoint for those individuals, which begins to move them through the range. For this, because we've added placement scale adjustments, there's more adjustments occurring as we've adjusted the pay ranges. And so there's going to be more movement of pay for employees through the range and improvement in pay. Okay. So for your instructional support, you can see that all these positions here are within 10% of market, with one, your computer lab A, being 14% above market. So that's good. Then we move to your auxiliary group. So this is, your custodial, maintenance, your police, food service. And so for this group here, you can see that pretty much most of the jobs are within 10% of the market, with two being at 13% above and 11% above. That's your shipping and receiving supervisor and your food service manager at the high school. And then two jobs that are more than 10% below. You have a police sergeant and then the maintenance foreman there. So, but for the most part, the majority of these positions are within that 10% of market. If you take a look at your custodian, which is a multi-incumbent job, it's the average pay by the district for that job is right at market. It's at zero, right? It's at 100% of market. For your bus driver, you're 6% below on average, right? And so we have made some improvements in the ranges, but you can see there that I was going to look for the food service worker, because that's another food service worker, that's 6% below, that's another multi-incumbent job. And so these are positions that we know tend to have more turnover, revolving door, because if they can make $1 more somewhere else, and for these jobs, you don't compete with other school districts for these jobs. You compete with every other employer in your community for these positions here. And so, that's why we want at least those entry rates of pay to be, competitive within your area. All right, so we have some recommendations and some cost summaries. As As we already looked at, the first model was at 2%. We already talked about the teacher model, that equating to 1,180 increase per continuing teacher. The starting salary for that one is 51,130. We did have those additional adjustments to close the gap at years 5 through 10. And then a 2% midpoint increase for all of the other employee groups, with some additional adjustments to make sure that as we raised the ranges, that your current employees are paid no less than 1% above the new range minimums. If 2% isn't enough to move them through the range and 1% above that starting rate of pay, then they get this additional adjustment to ensure that they're above the starting rate of pay, at least by 1%, so that there is some separation between a continuing employee and someone new. We did provide some targeted adjustments, as Dr. Rios asked. On the administrative professional, there is that additional adjustment of 1% for those that continue to be paid below 90% of market, or that new midpoint. And then we have modeled as well adjustments for jobs in the educator career pathway, such as your counselors, such as, let's say, assistant principals, so that on a daily rate basis, they're not paid less than what they would make as a teacher in the classroom based on their years. So we just ensure that their daily rate is not lower than what they would be making as a teacher. And that's, I think it's about 2% above the daily rate that we try to set that at. So there's a few adjustments there, and we'll have the numbers in the count. Then we did add an additional 1.5% line item cost of an additional 1.5% midpoint increase for your clerical, paraprofessional, and auxiliary staff. And then we also have the placement scale adjustments. And the placement scale adjustments basically spread the pay of employees from the minimum through the midpoint over a set number of years, so that someone with 5 years of experience is going to be making more than someone with 4 years as we raise the starting rate of pay, and that alleviates the compression. So a 5-year person that's been making more than a 0-year person continues to make a little bit more as we increase the starting rate of pay. Otherwise, we would have this compressed pay, and that 5-year person would be making the same as a 0-year person, and then you're going to hear from those employees. So we create that placement scale to provide pay separation and alleviate that pay compression for the low pay grades, right? Because they're the ones that were moving up the greatest as far as entry rates of pay. And so it was 15 years. We spread the pay over 15 years, minimum to midpoint. So as far as costs here go, you can see the cost for a 2%. For your teachers, it's $860,182. That's, of course, because they are the largest employee group, they're going to be really reflect the largest percentage cost increase because of the numbers. And then you can see that for administrative professional, we're looking at $311,457. With those additional adjustments, there are 12 on the administrative professional that are outside the range maximums. We've itemized the cost for a pay increase based on this 2% at $15,484. And then, as I mentioned, we ensure that no one is paid less than 1% above the new range minimums as we're adjusting those. And so you can see there's 2 on the admin professional at a cost of $8,116. And then those teacher pay equity adjustments to ensure counselors, diags, assistant principals are paid no less than what they would make as a teacher on a daily rate basis. And then the strategic adjustments are, that's 25. And so those are individuals that continue to be paid below 90% of the market or new midpoint, and so they get that additional 1% midpoint adjustment. Now, when we look at your paraprofessional and your auxiliary, you can see here that we have the 2% midpoint increase. That's $198,577. That we do have 41 employees that are above the range maximum, so we've itemized the cost for that increase. And then the adjustments to make sure that they're paid 1% above market, that's 72 at $26,641. And then those placement scale adjustments, as I mentioned, those are critical because we did raise the starting rates of pay, and we do have the pay plans towards the end or the back. So we can see what those improved starting rates of pay are, and I can scroll to them here after we look at these costs. Because we do have some improvements, and there are there's two options that we will cover as far as costs are associated. One improves the ranges, and then we have another cost option that takes the starting rate of pay to $15 an hour. Now, when we increase the starting rate of pay that much, we have to, that creates a domino effect for the other pay grades, the other ranges, right? Because you raise it to 15, so pay grade 1, so pay grade 2 starting rate of pay has to be higher than 15, and pay grade 3 has to be higher than that pay grade 2. So there's a domino effect that is created by raising it considerably, and then the need to spread the pay to fix that pay compression when we're increasing considerably. So we'll take a look at those costs here, but these ones did have an improvement in the pay ranges, even for your non-exempt. So, and then the auxiliary.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, I just, I looked through the presentation earlier. In relation to the $15 an hour and the effect that it has, I don't think it's gonna be on here, but what I had shared with our Board of Trustees is that we would provide them the adjustment. So the 1.5%, how far is that away from the $15 an hour? And can we have different options so then the board can decide if they want to get us to that $15 within 2 years or 3 years? So as 1.5 doesn't get us even a third of the way, then what does 2% do? Or what does 2.5% do?
Yeah.
So then the board can, because obviously we can't do it in 1 year.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's, and I will tell you that most districts are not able to get
Right.
to 15
But
in 1 year.
if we give them the option of the additional 1.5% adjustment, a 2% adjustment, and a 2.5% adjustment, then we can see how many years it will get us to get to that $15. And it'll just give them different choices.
Okay. I mean, we can work with that. I know that what we have here is at least, and let me forward, just so that we can see that the proposed plan under whether it's the 2, 2.5, or 3, at least gets the starting rate of pay for your non-exempt employees to, I don't want to look at the $15 an hour one, it's the ones beyond that. Here they are. So when we look at the proposed pay ranges that are not the $15
What page are
an
you on
hour, on page 44, these are the pay ranges that tie in with the 2, the 2.5, and the 3% models. The cost summaries that are separate are for the $15 increase, and I haven't covered those. But for your auxiliary, this is for your paraprofessional group. This takes the starting rate of pay to $11.25 an hour. So we are making some gradual improvements, and this is really kind of I think, Dr. Rios, what you mentioned, it could be planned over a in this case, probably 3-year time frame, possibly to get to a $15 an hour, but we continue to adjust the ranges. Could we see what it would be to take that to $12 an hour this year? We can, but that's $11.25 for that set, and then the pay grade 2 is $12.25 an hour. That's an improvement from your current pay ranges. Now, when you look at your auxiliary, for this group on page 46, we did the placement scale adjustments as well because we were raising the starting rate of pay. And then for your auxiliary, you can see that we've improved even, auxiliary as well to a starting rate of pay of $11.25 an hour. And currently, just forgot, it's at 10.25, something like that, an hour. So it's a $1 an hour improvement for the lowest pay grades within your non-exempt jobs. All right, so I'll go back to the cost, and I'm sorry that I'm moving this. Hopefully I don't make anyone sick as I'm scrolling this. So going back to that 2% on page 33, the cost for this, for the 2%, the 2.5%, and the 3% that I'm going to cover tie into the pay plans that I just mentioned with a starting rate of pay of $11.25 for your clerical, para, and your auxiliary, okay? And then we have a separate section that is the cost associated with taking them to $15 an hour. So the 2% is $4 million for the pay increase with, again, the placement scale adjustments, as you can see on your auxiliary, being the largest, actually for your paraprofessional and your auxiliary for both, because for one, we've got the adjustment to 1% above the range minimum, 230 employees. As we raise from 10.25 to 11.25, we have to bring everyone up, and then we have to do that, alleviate that pay compression. So for your paraprofessionals, you can see that's your $15 an hour starting rate. I don't want to cover that one yet. Let me go back to the page 26. The cost for a 2% on page 26 is to get your employees, your non-exempts, to get your teacher schedule as we covered with a starting salary of $51,130, the $1,180, the 2% for your administrative professional, the 2% for paras and auxiliary, with an $11.25 starting rate of pay is almost $2.2 million increase. That's a 3.3% increase to your current payroll budget. Then the next page, which is page 27, that's when we've got the Model 2, which is a 2.5%. And the 2.5% is that teacher schedule that we also just looked at, which was a 2.5%, $1,500 increase for all continuing teachers, the $51,500 starting rate of pay, those additional adjustments at those years 3 through 15, and then the adjustments necessary, right, to get individuals to the new rate of pay, $11.25 for both your paras and your auxiliary. Okay, this is still under that pay plan that had the starting $11.25. So the cost associated with this is a little over $2.5 million at the 2.5% increase. That's almost a 3.9% increase to your payroll budget, right, of $65.6 million. And then, of course, the 3.1% that's for your teachers, and then it's 3% for the other pay groups. As we mentioned, this is $1,800 for your teachers. This is on page 29. And then those additional adjustments, it has a starting salary of $51,750. And then the 3% increase for all of the other groups, with those targeted adjustments for those below 90%, ensuring that they're all paid 1% above market. The educator career path adjustments, or those teacher equity adjustments, and then that additional 1.5% for your clerical paraprofessionals. So these three models here, while we have a 2, a 2.5, and a 3% pay increase model, within each one of these models, there is a line item cost of an additional 1.5% increase. So in reality, the employees, your non-exempts, getting an additional 1.5%. So a 2% increase would equate to them actually getting a 3.5% increase. And that's applied before any of the other adjustments are applied, as far as placement scale adjustments, or taking them to the new range minimums. But these costs are still connected to the pay plans that have the $11.25 starting rate of pay. Okay? So the 3% on page 30 is a $2.8 million increased cost, or 4.3% budget increase. Now we'll talk about the cost associated with a $15 increase starting rate of pay. And that's where the costs really began to go up. Because as we mentioned, you currently have $10.75. We're increasing it to $15 an hour. And so we're talking, $4 plus increase, and the cost associated with raising everyone's pay to that, and then alleviating the pay compression. So on page 31 is just a summary of those 2, 2.5, and 3% that we just talked about. But then beginning on page 32, is the introductory page of the cost summary and the pay plan specific to a $15 an hour starting rate for your paras and auxiliaries. And so the 2% increase for this group, as you can see here, is $4.058 million increase, or that's a 6.2% increase. If you were to go in 1 year to a $15 an hour starting rate of pay with a 2% increase. Now, the higher the general pay increase, the less the adjustments have to kick in. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're talking about, increasing that rate of pay, that even, a 3% general pay increase is still not going to get staff, your non-exempt staff, your clerical and para and auxiliary, to that $15 an hour. That we still have to provide those additional adjustments to get them there. So this is a 2% for the $15 an hour starting rate of pay. The same remains for teachers under the 2% model that we just reviewed, and for for the admin professionals. So nothing changed for those two categories. The only thing that's changing is your paraprofessional and your auxiliary costs, because we're raising the entry rates in these models to 15 and running how much it would cost to do that in 1 year.
So Luz, it's safe to say that if I compare page 33 and page 26, if I compare those two pages, the difference in the $15 an hour cost it comes down to the subtotal of the implementation of equity adjustments. Is that accurate, or is there?
Yes. Pretty much. Pretty much.
So it costs about $1.8 million more to bring the,
To raise it to $15 an hour.
okay, so then the plan would be what percentage it gets us to 600,000, 1,200,000, I'm not 1,200, 600,000, 1.2 and 1.8. What percentage would get us there?
What percent?
So in other words, it's gonna cost 1.8 million. So
Yes.
if we do a 3-year plan, what percentage will get me to the 600,000? What percentage will get me to 1.2 million? And what percentage will get me to 1.8 in equity adjustments above that 1.5 that I asked for?
I have to, I mean.
No, you don't have to do it right now. I'm
Yeah,
just.
yeah,
yeah.
that's what you're wanting. I was like, oh my God, Dr. Reed, it's a calculation.
No, I'm-
But yes, we would, we would need to run those numbers. But, I mean, pretty much what we have been working with, with districts is, for some, we've taken where they are currently to the 15, and we've said, okay, we're going to target a middle ground to get there. And for some, it's been $12 an hour. For others, it's been $13 an hour for that lowest level, knowing that they can do that, and then they can work on increasing thereafter to $14 an hour and then $15 an hour thereafter, right? So basically spreading the cost over a 3-year implementation cycle.
Yeah, it just sounds that if 1.5 gets us 164, then for 600,000, it'd be somewhere between 5 and 6% of that equity adjustment.
Yeah.
Unless we wanted to do a 4-year plan. Oh, okay. But if we can see that way they'd at least have some options.
You don't want to do 4 years.
No? 5 years? Oh, 3 years.
Okay, back to that.
I'm sorry, one more question, Luz.
Sure.
It's just you made the trip out here, we want to take advantage of you.
That's
being here.
fine, no problem.
So have other ISDs started moving towards that $15 an hour plan, or is
So I have a few in the Rio Grande Valley who wanted to do that. In fact, last year they did that, and it cost a lot of money, but they did it. And then in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we're seeing that. Keep in mind that it also has to do with cost of living, right? And the impact associated with that. In the Austin area, that has been a big push. And, the Austin area cost of living it's just not sustainable for people making $11 an hour, or even, $12 an hour. It's not a living wage anymore for them. So you kind of have to also take into consideration what, how is the impact of the inflation and cost of living within your community relative to some of these other areas, right? Dallas has kind of been similar, like Austin, Houston, where the housing market has driven a lot of this, the employee shortage, and everybody fighting for the few employees that are out there. But clearly you have to also take into consideration the cost of living for the area, because it's no different than, salaries being paid. Let's say, Austin and Portland, Oregon are kind of compared the same, right, because of the cost of living, but the salaries to say, you know, that we would want to pay in Austin the same as, let's say, Washington State, you know, it's very different, right? We still have to consider the differences in the cost of housing, that impact as well. So that's why when we're working with districts, we say you don't have to get to $15 now. For one, it's not mandated, okay? It's not, the Department of Labor has not mandated yet a $15 an hour starting rate of pay. What's driving it, of course, is employers, school districts not being able to find, employees to fill positions. Some positions more so than others. And then, you know, you've got the inflation, you've got, you know, the cost of living that is going up. And so you want to make improvements, but you don't necessarily have to get there in the 1 year. But you want to be competitive over time, right? So, questions?
When you're talking about the other districts moving to the $15 an hour plan that we're talking about, what was most common that they were doing as far as years in their plan? Was it a 1-year plan? Were they doing it over 2 years? Were they doing it all at once? What is the most common ground that you have found with other districts moving to that plan?
The ones that have already moved to $15 an hour did it.
Or are working towards it?
Or working towards it. So I have a couple. So I have a mix. Some, as I mentioned, we kind of hit a middle ground, and we said we're going to try to get definitely $12 an hour, no less than $12 an hour. We can do that financially within our resources. We make some improvements in our pay for our staff, our lowest level jobs, and then we are committed to make some improvements thereafter. For some jobs, like bus drivers, they have to make that improvement. You can't find bus drivers, so they have made that increase immediate, right? They've increased bus drivers' starting rate of pay, made adjustments to be no less than $12 an hour. Others, it's been $12.50 an hour. Others, it's been $13 an hour. So we've kind of been between the $12, $13 an hour. But then we had those that jumped out immediately because they were being impacted big time in the areas that I mentioned to you. And they said, we cannot be paying less than $15 an hour because our neighboring districts have already gone there, right? And they were poaching their employees. So, and then, you've got the Whataburger, you've got Dairy Queen, you've got, in our area, Amazon, you've got Target, everybody, that's paying $15 or more. So you kind of have to take a look to see, what is it that you're competing with, right? What are those external pressures that are within your community, in your area, that you can work with as you make these improvements?
Thank you.
Okay.
So just for information, we did that with our bus drivers a couple of years ago. So we,
Yes.
Yeah, in some of those areas, we're already there.
We made a big improvement in the pay for your bus drivers then. I think there's another improvement for your bus driver pay as well within the proposed plans here. So, all right, so the cost, let me use the mouse before I. So we already saw the 2% model and the difference there being the $15 an hour cost. At 2.5%, it's $4.4 million. So you should see that the cost for teachers and admin professional remain the same in the comparisons. The only things that are changing are the cost for para and auxiliary and the cost models. And then the 3% is a $4.6 million with those implementation equity adjustments being, more the general pay increase. right? If you take a look at these models here, beginning on page 33, the implementation equity adjustments are more than the general pay increase because a 2% increase doesn't get someone to $15 an hour. So we do have that additional 1.5% for your non-exempt, additional 1.5% for your paras and for your auxiliary, but we have to provide additional adjustments just to try to target that $15 an hour. So I just wanted to make that notation, that the adjustments are greater than the general pay increase when we try to reach that $15 an hour. And then for the 3%, as I mentioned, $4.6 million. That's a 7.1% increase to the current payroll budget. And then you've got the summary of those three there, and the summary, and then the cost models, each one beginning on page 33. You can see right here at the top, Model 1, 2% GPI, $15 starting rate. I want to make sure that we were able to identify the costs that were specific to the $15 an hour starting rate as compared to the other costs that we just reviewed that were improving the ranges but not hitting that $15 an hour rate. So that's it. Then you've got the pay plans. And the pay plans that follow within this section, just for you to see, are the ones and what they would look like at $15 an hour starting rate of pay. And as I mentioned, pay grade 2 has to be higher than pay grade 1. So you've got, 15 and 15.15 and 15.25. And then within that, you've got to create that, the adjustments to make sure that pay is not compressed, and that's what's driving a lot of the costs there. So those are the plans, and those are on pages 37 through 38, 39, and 40. Those are specific to the $15 an hour, just so that you would see what that would look like. The ones thereafter, beginning on page 41, are what we typically do as far as when we come in. We run the cost for the pay increase. We adjust all your pay ranges. And in this case, we made an even more targeted focus in improving the starting rate of pay for your clerical, para, and auxiliary by increasing it to $11.25 an hour, $1 more. But again, that's more of a gradual process to get to a stronger rate. So pay plans follow for all the pay groups after that. That is it. Any questions?
Board members, I'll open it up for questions. Luz, before I turn it over to anyone that has a question, I had mentioned, how people are starting to be creative and making their budgets a little bit different from previous years regarding everything that's going up. And I have seen, for example, budgets proposed that include a 1% increase for those that make $100,000 or over, 2% for principals, 3% for teachers, and the majority for hourly wage. How are they doing it with a pay scale?
So, for one, when they do that, so as we set or create the new pay ranges, right? And some districts who have opted to go that route, which we don't recommend, by the way. For one, you want to value your employees. You want to value them, consistently. We do know that there's more money that has been applied as general pay increase for non-exempts because they've needed, it's been needed to get that starting rate to go up. But with that said, while the general pay increase is lower for that group, you still have these additional adjustments that have to kick in, for some. So let's say you mentioned, yes, for maybe those that are making $100,000, giving them a 1%, the principals, assistant principals, maybe a 2%. Well, we still have to take a look at the pay of the assistant principal with the percentage, and an adjustment has to kick in to make sure that they're not paid less than what they would make as a teacher when you're giving teacher pay increases of, let's say, 3%, right? There's got to be, we have to make sure that we're not, by doing that we're not paying our administrators that are in that educator career path less. But we have seen a few districts have started that route, and then at the last minute, they don't go with it. And they end up passing the same general pay increase for the employees, or they may pass a smaller general pay increase, let's say for the administrative group, but not target specific positions or specific pay grades. And that would be, what we would say we wouldn't recommend that. If you want to go a smaller percentage for the group overall, that has been done, but not specific jobs or specific pay grades.
Lucy, if I may, I saw, for example, 2.53 brings us right into the market value, pretty much a straight line. And I guess, that 1, 2, 3%, it takes you way out of that comparison of the market value, correct? It throws, we're trying to get it as close as we can.
For teacher
market
pay or for your other
For your pay,
groups?
yes, right
Yeah.
now, as
For-
I see the graphs,
Yeah.
every
For-
increase, we're getting closer and
Yes.
right on
Yes,
above.
that's correct. So we started out with that 2%, right? And that trend line for the 2% model begins to narrow the gap to that market median line. The 2.5% gets even that closer, and then that 3%, you're sitting right on there. But keep in mind that that's current market as well, right? And so it could look different after the other districts approve their budget. But if the other districts are going to, let's say, provide an average of a 3%, and the district is, only able to do, let's say, a 2%, you're gonna drop, right? Because that pay increase amount is less than what the average within your peer group is being offered. So, that may impact your position, but as long as something is done, we continue to stay connected and continue to work towards closing the gaps as we've done over over these past few years.
Okay, and I have another question. I think I'll let Dr. Rios. How were some districts able to increase the substitute pay tremendously? They couldn't find substitutes, so how would it affect the overall budget?
Well, Mr. Massa, it depends on the type of increase that we would want to give. We usually spend a little bit over, or budget a little bit over $1 million in substitutes. Is that correct? So then depending on the percentage that we
1.5.
want to go, then you just add 100, 200, 300,000, depending on how much we want to increase. The part that we have to be careful with is, like for example, summer school. We're paying a whole lot of money for summer school. Well, we don't want to make it such a big difference that you're better off subbing than you are teaching. So we just need to be careful with that. But within that, there is some room for increase.
Yes, Dr. Rios, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's some other challenges that came out of the adjustments to substitute teacher rates, which districts had to because they couldn't find those substitutes. But what ended up happening is that the substitute rate was so strong that teacher aides, because their rate of pay was not adjusted, they were, they were coming in saying, well, wait a minute, I'd rather be a substitute because I can make more, although, the hours and the availability and, that kind of stuff, that's going to have an impact. But it really brought another issue to the forefront of the whole trying to address and increase the rate of pay for substitutes, because then you had another employee group that was like, well, wait a minute, I'd rather be a substitute, I can make more, because you're paying them so much more. And so, our in our discussions with districts, it was, just make sure, if you're gonna raise it, you gotta take a look at your rate of pay for your other groups, especially your teacher aides.
Well, if I may, I'm thinking in a different area, because I'm looking at, legislation that came in for the rehired teachers, and saying, we have a pool of teachers now that is very costly to keep on board full-time, but they could very easily go into substitute positions if, their pay is a little bit better.
Oh, absolutely. We can adjust our pay specifically for retired teachers who work as subs. And so when we bring forth, really we bring that every month, and we can always adjust it, but that could certainly be part of the budget cycle, Mr. Mesa.
Yeah.
Well, we're having this conversation, so I'm bringing things up, and I want to give the opportunity to everyone, so, if you'd like to ask a question, now's the time on salaries. And I know, Amy, for example, we always look at hourly wage and think, with everything from property values going up, to groceries, to gasoline, I think of the hourly wage and I'm thinking, man, that's where that 5% needs to be. I think we're okay with teachers, and I'm going to say this, but not everybody gives a 4% like we did last year, and we need to make adjustments throughout the years so that we can bring the other people up to par. That's my thought. But anyone else want to interject? Amy, you have anything?
Oh, I have some questions, but maybe later. I'd just like to maybe sit down with and just try to figure out some things one-on-one, but I appreciate your time, Liz.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I saw that food service worker on the left side. That
Yeah.
needs to be adjusted, so.
Yeah, and keep in mind, there is an adjustment in the range, right? It's not like there is not an improvement. It's just, can we do this gradually, rather than being, increasing it and then having to deal with the impact afterwards. I will tell you that we are having more increase about staffing reviews from districts who have increased their starting rates of pay considerably, because they can't continue to carry those costs unless the legislature does something differently. And so now what they've done is they've contacted us and said, we need a staffing review because we can't continue with the same numbers.
So that's a huge point, Mr. Mesa. And we're going to see in the next presentation, and Mo Casey is going to step up here in a minute, we're going to see how the tax compression is going to lower our income by up to $4 million. And we're talking about increasing our expenditures by anywhere from $2.5 to $5 million in terms of salary. So naturally, what we have to do is figure out what positions we can do without to begin to reduce that. Now, there are some other things within that we'll get to that'll provide some way to close that gap. But we're already doing that, and not this week, but next week when we present, we'll present different cost-cutting measures that we will take so that we can provide for the salary increases. But I think that we have a real good idea, but that's next week, but that is part of it.
Yeah.
I really think that there's a whole lot to think about, and really there's a lot of information for board members to process in the next
Yes.
week. I know that I had suggested 1.5% above what everybody else gets for hourly and for auxiliary and paraprofessional, but if it's gonna cost 1.8 million to get there, then I think the easiest way for the board to look at it is, okay, do we wanna get to $15 sooner than later? Well, if that is, let's do 600,000 every year, because we can do that within, but to go beyond that, and $600,000 into that budget, that increases the hourly, or which are the paraprofessional and auxiliary, by about 7.5%. That's twice as much of a rate as you would give everybody else. So that's significant, but that's an easy way to look at it. It'll cost us $1.8 million to get there. So let's divide it into 3 years,
Into 3
and that way it's easier to grasp. And that equates to about 7.5%. Luz has to go back and do the math to make sure I'm right, but it's gonna be around there.
Yeah, it's going to be close.
I'm glad that the stipends look like real close.
Yes.
I mean, we're like $500 off.
Yeah, yeah, I mean.
But they're pretty much in line.
You're, I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, you guys have worked diligently in really getting, to improved rates of pay. It's been it's just been fun being able to be a part of the process and see the improvements. But there are some challenges. There's some big challenges, and the money just doesn't come. There's a limit, and you've got to work within that, and you've got to prioritize. I'm preaching to the choir.
Anyone else with a question? Luz, as always, we appreciate you doing these studies for us, because it's an eye-opener in the areas that we do need to make some adjustments.
Yeah.
And I think you do a very thorough job. I think we have a lot of information to work with, and we'll continue improving to make sure that we're in line with market value.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we continue with our workshop. We go to item 2, which is a MoCasey revenue projections, and we'll have Amy Childress come forward.
Good evening, President Mesa, Dr. Rios, and members of the board. Before we continue, I want to apologize. We did put presentations at your podium. I did not provide you a binder this evening, but if you would like to have a binder, if you'll just leave your presentations at your podium, then we will provide you everything in a binder for the next meeting.
Yes. For the new board members, it's always great to have like workshop 1, workshop 2, everything in there, because if you're like me, I have some things in the garage, some things in the car. So it's always great to look at all the information that we've had.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
All right.
Yes, we want the binders.
Okay. As we continue this evening, we have Mr. Josh Haney. He's an associate with our consultants, MoCasey, and he's going to provide us with an overview of some revenue projections for the upcoming budget year.
Thank you. And welcome.
Hello, good to be here. So we have been working with your district staff, Amy and Dr. Rios, to go through a number of different scenarios and prepare a number of different options and sort of fine-tune our assumptions for next year where we think we're going to be with enrollment and attendance. And so a lot of work has gone into this, and we're happy to continue tweaking as you guys have questions and need time to digest this. I know you just spent some time looking through a lot of numbers and reviewing a lot of different options, and so I'll try and move slowly through this, but if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me, interject at any time. So when we do these revenue projections for school districts, we always start with our assumptions. So what do we think next school year is going to look like, okay? And this kind of shows where you've been both in the prior year, where we think we're going to end up this year at the end of the 21-22 school year, and where we think we're going to be next school year. And so as y'all are aware, the school finance system in Texas is funded based on average daily attendance. That's what ADA means. And so that is a measure of how often the students attend school, either in person or virtual. And that, again, is the basis upon which your foundation school program entitlement is calculated. So that is really one of the main factors to determining your funding. And we can see for, just looking at the 21-22 column, this year we had what TEA is calling the operational minute adjustment. And essentially what that is a hold harmless that artificially raises up your ADA for purposes of funding to flow more funds to your district to sort of offset the impact of COVID. Okay, right? Districts across the state had pretty large disruptions to their attendance with the Delta wave, the Omicron wave, and all that. And so this operational minute adjustment helps to increase your attendance rate over the first 4-6 weeks of the school year, okay? And we can see the impact of that here on the 21-22 column. So as of the fall snapshot back in October, you had enrollment of 9,870. The data that your staff shared with us in terms of the actual kids that showed up to school each day, or what we're projecting also for the rest of the school year, it's obviously not over quite yet, but we have a pretty good sense of where it's going to end up. That number is 8,349. Okay, that's where we think your ADA is going to end up. However, that operational minute adjustment is going to bring that ADA up to 8,739. Okay, so it's going to essentially fund you as if you had a little bit more than 8,700 ADA. Okay, so that's going to mean additional funds for your district, and it's going to offset some of those impacts that Omicron had on your attendance. The other thing I want to call your attention to is that there is a big ol' NA in that space for next year. Okay, it's very unlikely that the state is going to continue a hold harmless or an operational minute adjustment for next school year. And so that's something that school districts, that we're advising school districts to start planning for now. We've enjoyed various styles of hold harmlesses over the past couple of years from the state. I don't anticipate that continuing for the next school year, and so we'll have to live on the attendance that we're able to generate. I think that's very likely to be the case next school year. And so you can see that we are projecting the attendance rate to bounce back next school year, and we've developed this assumption based on the recommendations of Dr. Rios and the staff here. And so we're projecting essentially enrollment to stay flat, and you kind of see enrollment did stay flat from 2021 to 21-22. We're just sort of continuing that trend, but the main thing to note here, of course, is that the attendance rate is going to increase and result in actual ADA of 8,850. Okay, that's the assumption that's sort of feeding into this model. The other big assumption that goes into the calculations for determining your state aid and your funding is your property values, okay? As y'all are likely aware, property values have been rapidly increasing for just about every district around the state, and it's no different here. You can see that you did see a big increase in 2021, about 16.8%. You saw a slight decline in 21-22, and then you sort of rebounded with more growth, at least projected based on your April estimates. We're looking at just shy of a 9% year-over-year growth, okay? And as I note there, this includes the passage of Prop 2, okay? So in those April estimates we got from your CAD, they didn't include that value loss that would have, or that has now occurred with the passage of Prop 2. We made that adjustment, so we still think that you're on track, at least according to the April estimates we've gotten from your CAD, that you guys can expect a 9% growth net of Prop 2. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. And then real quickly, before I get to the good stuff, I want to just make sure that if there's new board members, that we kind of do a quick vocab check to make sure everyone kind of understands how an M&O rate is constructed. And sort of the component parts of an M&O tax rate. So I'm just going to go through that really quickly before I get into the various scenarios. So in Texas, school districts levy a maintenance and operation tax rate. That's what's used to pay, potentially those salary increases that we were talking about earlier. And the M&O rate is comprised of 2 tiers and 2 levels. So we have Tier 1, which is noted there, and then we have Tier 2, which can include up to 17 pennies that sit on top of Tier 1. Within Tier 2, we have the 2 levels that are noted there. The first 8 pennies of the first 8 pennies above Tier 1 are called golden pennies. They're called golden pennies because they're more valuable. They draw down more state aid. And then the 9 pennies above that are called copper pennies, and they're half as valuable as golden pennies. So with Tier 1, that is the portion of the tax rate that is subject to the ongoing compression that was put in place by House Bill 3 in 2019, okay? Prior to House Bill 3, most districts had a Tier 1 rate of $1, okay? Over time, due to either statewide property value growth or your own local property value growth, that first dollar of your tax rate has been compressed each year since House Bill 3's passage. And we're going to go into the exactly how much compression you've seen here in a minute. As I mentioned, that the exact amount of compression you see is tied, there's sort of 2 factors that go into that. How much property value growth the state sees, sort of the growth across the state in total, and how much growth your specific district is seeing. Okay, so if you're essentially outpacing the state, which you guys have been, given those sort of double-digit or near double-digit year-over-year growth rates we saw on the earlier slide, you guys are subject to additional compression, okay, because you're outpacing the state. And we'll see that again here on the next slide. The other thing to note is that this Tier 1 rate is something that's calculated by TEA, okay? You guys or your staff reports your property values to TEA each summer. Once you get the July certified values, they pluck some data points from that, send it on to TEA, and then at the end of August, TEA will calculate and finalize the Tier 1 portion of your tax rate, okay? So you can't really know exactly what your M&O tax rate needs to be until you get that final Tier 1 portion from TEA at the end of August, okay? So that's just sort of how that timeline works with tax compression. This is really a TEA-created metric that you need to rely on them to sort of put their stamp on before you can adopt your tax rate. For, let's see. Okay, so that's Tier 1. And now we're going to just kind of walk through how your district has experienced tax compression under House Bill 3. So as I noted earlier, prior to House Bill 3's passage, most districts' Tier 1 rate was $1. That was the case for you all in the 2018-19 school year. Everybody across the state saw 7 cents of compression in the 1920 school year. So everybody went from $1 to 93 pennies. And then in 2021, you guys, as I noted earlier, you saw double-digit property value growth. So while some districts went down to, I think it was 91.64, you guys were compressed even further, right? Because you guys outpaced the state that year. So you guys got compressed down to 86.10 for your Tier 1 rate in 2021. And to kind of continue on here, last year, 21-22 school year, you saw a little bit of compression again there. You were compressed down to 84.35, and then given the higher levels of growth that we're projecting, that we're seeing from your April estimates, we think that you guys are going to get compressed all the way down to 80.46. Okay, so that's $1 in the 18-19 school year, all the way down to 80.46 projected, the rate you'll adopt this September. I should mention that 80.46 is the lowest you can possibly be compressed next year. So even if your values, let's say maybe your CAD was conservative, right? And maybe they come back and it's a 12% growth, right? Rather than a 9% growth. You're still only going to get compressed down to 80/46, okay? We kind of know that already.
So, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just so that we all are understanding. More than likely, our tax rate is going to be compressed to .8046, and we'll know this August, so we can set the tax rate.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, so we sort of have an inkling now based on the April estimates, right? But they're called estimates for a reason. Sometimes they can be pretty wildly off. And so we're going to wait before we advise districts to wait until you get your July certifieds, 1, and then 2, you submit that data to TEA so that they can do their versions of the calculations. But given the information we have today, it's likely that you guys will be compressed down to 80/46.
Just so it makes more sense, can I ask you to go back one slide?
Sure.
And I know it's not highlighted, but I just want the team of 8 to understand that show the compression on the tier 2. I know you're going to talk about it later, but
Yeah.
it's just important. We're that high on tier 2 because of the tax swap, but it was further compressed in 2019, 2020.
Correct, yeah, and I'll get to that, I think, just right after this. But essentially, yes, you guys had a TRE, I think, in 18, right? November of 18, is that right? Yeah. And so you guys went out and increased the tier 2 portion of your tax rate up to 1598. House Bill 3, as I mentioned, the ongoing compression in House Bill 3 focuses just on tier 1. However, in that first year of House Bill 3, they had one-time compression of those copper pennies, okay? So that's what knocked you down, and you can barely see it here, and we'll highlight it here in a minute, but that's what knocked you down from the 1598. You went to the voters and had them approve, right, in 18. That knocked you down from that amount to the 1317, okay? And then the 1317 without any sort of election or anything else is going to just keep on persisting into the future unless you guys take some sort of action. Okay, and we'll go into those options here in a moment. Okay, so that's the story on Tier 1. Again, we're at $1 prior to House Bill 3. Your property value growth has outpaced the state, so you guys are growing very quickly, and that's resulted in that compression down to the floor or the likely compression down to the floor next year of 80/46. Okay, so now switching to Tier 2. As I mentioned, districts are sort of statutorily able to levy up to 17 pennies in Tier 2. So these pennies, again, sit on top of that Tier 1 compressed rate. With Tier 1, you don't really have much control over it, right? That's tied to your values, right? Your property value growth. You submit those values to the state. The state spits back out to you what your Tier 1 rate is, okay? And it's all sort of mechanical and determined by the formula. With Tier 2, this is the portion of your M&O tax rate that you can sort of exercise some control over, okay? And you can either call an election or change the number of Tier 2 pennies that you levy. And so there's different options there, and we'll go through those here in a moment. The one thing to note here, I already talked about the first 8 are golden pennies, the next 9 are copper pennies. They're called that because of the different yields and the sort of different value when it comes for state aid. The other thing to note is the first 5 pennies, so those first 5 golden pennies, districts can adopt those just by simple majority of the board, okay? If you are sort of adding new pennies above that 5th penny, normally that requires an election, okay? So you guys had your election in 18, right? That brought you up to 1598. So you guys have already adopted pennies 1 through 1598, then that got compressed down to 0.1317. And I'll tell that story in more detail here in a minute. But just keep in mind that going forward, depending on what changes the district wants to make, you can always get those 5 pennies just with board action. But if you go back down below where you're at right now, and you want to re-adopt pennies above the fifth penny, you'd have to go to the voters again to do that, okay? Let's see, I already mentioned the tax compression there for the copper pennies. That's what knocked you down from the 1598 down to 0.1317. And so you can kind of see the story here as it's unfolded with House Bill 3. You had your TRE, that's what took you up to the 1598 for a total tax rate of $0.1598 in 1819. You had 1920 was the first year of tax compression with House Bill 3. You lost the 7 pennies on Tier 1, and you saw some compression in those copper pennies to bring you down to a total tax rate of 10617. And then for 2021 and beyond, that 1317 is just going to keep on rolling on. It's going to float down on top of the Tier 1 tax rate. Okay, so you can see the difference between 1920 and 2021 is just the Tier 1 compression, right? You were compressed down from 93 to 8610. That's what resulted in the decline in your overall M&O tax rate. Okay, the Tier 2 portion stayed the same. And that's the story essentially since that first year of House Bill 3. The Tier 1 rate has been compressed due to your property value growth, and floating down on top of that compressed Tier 1 rate is your Tier 2 pennies, okay? So again, for next school year, unless the board makes a different decision, but if you just sort of maintain the status quo, the M&O tax rate would be the 8046 from your Tier 1 rate plus the 0.1317 for a total tax rate of 0.9363. Okay, so that's the story on Tier 1 and Tier 2. As I mentioned before, you guys still have remaining taxing capacity. Okay, so as I mentioned, you can go up to 17 pennies above the Tier 1 rate. You guys have been compressed down to the 0.1317 pennies in Tier 2. That leaves a remaining taxing capacity of 0.0383. Okay, so that's sort of your wiggle room under the statutory cap. Okay. You can access those pennies in one of two ways. Normally, right, you're sort of beyond the board-approved section, right, that the first 5 pennies. Now we're kind of up in the higher ranges. So normally that would require a TRE. There is a provision in the tax code that we refer to as disaster pennies that allows you to temporarily adopt additional Tier 2 pennies if the governor declares a disaster in your district the preceding calendar year. Okay, so you'd adopt this rate in September of this year. A disaster would have had to occur in calendar 21. Okay, there was a statewide disaster, Winter Storm Uri. The governor declared that for every county in the state, and so that now opens up disaster penny eligibility for every district in the state. Again, these pennies are temporary. They only last 1 year, as compared to pennies that are adopted through an election. Those are permanently adopted. They don't ever expire. Okay, these disaster pennies, this disaster penny provision is, again, just temporary. Those pennies expire after 1 year. The other thing to mention, we have a lot of districts that are sort of looking at this disaster penny provision, and one thing I cautioned them on earlier, there's 2 points to make. One is, as I note there in that last bullet point, that the state appropriated, I think, about $35 million to a Winter Storm Uri reimbursement program last session. And so if you do choose to go the disaster penny route and name Winter Storm Uri as the reason you're doing that, the fact that there's a reimbursement program sitting out there could undercut some of the rationale to adopt these pennies without going to the voters. Okay, so that's something to consider. I will say that $35 million for a statewide reimbursement program is not that much, and there is some limitations to that program, and so you could potentially still have costs from URI that aren't reimbursed through that program. And so that's something, if you do want to go down that route, those are all things to consider. The other thing I caution districts on is, while it's not statutorily required to keep your revenues from your disaster pennies perfectly equal to the cost of the disaster, it's best practice to do that. You don't have to report these your costs from the disaster to TEA or anybody else, but this is a tool that the legislature has given school districts to help them respond to disasters, and so it's best practice to, if you are going to use this disaster penny provision, to keep it sort of constrained so that the revenues generated from those pennies are aligned roughly with the costs from the disaster. Okay, so that's all my caveats and legalese there with disaster pennies. Now we'll kind of shift on to the good stuff here, sort of what the impact of some of these decisions could be. So we have 3 scenarios here. And again, these are sort of relying on all those assumptions we walked through earlier with regard to ADA, attendance rates, property values, all that stuff. And we can kind of see that middle scenario there at the 0.1317, that's status quo. If you just roll over the same Tier 2 pennies that you had last year into next year, that would have a total M&O revenue amount of $87.3 million. Okay, if you go and grab those additional 0.0383 Tier 2 pennies, right, either through a TRE or disaster pennies, either way, the funding would be the same no matter which method you use to access those pennies, okay? If you go up and increase your Tier 2 amount to 0.17, that would increase your M&O revenues to $89.4 million, so that's a net difference of $2.1 million, okay? So that again, $2.1 million is the net impact of going out and grabbing that 0.0383 Tier 2 pennies. The other thing to mention is, of course, you guys had that TRE in 2018, and part of what the argument was to your constituency was that you were going to swap the pennies from the INS rate over to the M&O rate. And this was perfectly allowed back then, and it was a savvy decision that a lot of districts elected to do. And the reason I say that is because you are able to school districts are able to draw down more state aid on the M&O side, okay? And so instead of leaving those pennies on the INS and drawing down a minimal amount of INS state aid, you decided to shift them over to M&O, still keep the tax burden the same for your taxpayers, but you're able to enjoy the benefits of increased state aid, right? The state matched those dollars at a higher rate than they would have done on the INS side. Unfortunately, the rules changed on that. House Bill 3 sort of discouraged districts from doing that in the future, right? And then House Bill 1525 went one step further and said, not only can you not go out for new swap and drops, but all of the swap and drops that were done in the past need to be undone, essentially. You may want to talk to some legal counsel about exactly what may be required there, but generally speaking, we advise our clients to start to unwind those swap and drops that they did in the past. And so that's really what drove the inclusion of the scenario to go down to the 5 pennies. Okay, so it's essentially undoing the swap and drop, not exactly penny for penny that you did in the past, but roughly speaking, going back down to the 5 pennies and undoing the swap and drop, and then that would come with a corresponding increase in the INS rate. I think the other thing to mention is, generally speaking, across all of these scenarios, you're likely to have to increase your INS rate so that you're compliant with House Bill 1525, okay? Because remember, House Bill 1525 says your INS rate needs to service your debt, right? It discourages and creates penalties for utilizing that swap and drop strategy and having a M&O rate that's higher and then shifting funds over to INS. So you can see that removing those tier 2 pennies, going from 0.1317 down, and let me catch up here on the presentation, going down to the 5 golden pennies, that would result in at least a $4.6 million loss in M&O revenue. Okay, and I say at least because there is a sort of brand new hold harmless that was created with the American Rescue Plan. With many hold harmlesses that TEA puts out, there's a reduction. They sort of penalize districts that go and reduce their tax rate, okay? Because these hold harmlesses kind of take a snapshot of your funding at a certain time where you had this tax rate, and then they don't want to, through a hold harmless, keep funding you if you don't have that same tax effort, okay? So that's how some various hold harmlesses over the years have worked. It's unclear if there's going to be a reduction in this hold harmless that was created by the American Rescue Plan that would reflect any reduction in your tax rate. We don't, TEA hasn't, this is sort of just recently announced in the last couple months, sort of their mechanics on this calculation. I don't even think they have final rules on it yet. And so we have a question into the agency right now and sort of their preliminary calculations. They don't appear to be taking into consideration a reduction in your tax rate, okay? If they did, then potentially that $4.6 million loss would go up to a $6.3 million loss, okay? So that hold harmless right now we think is offsetting some of the negative impacts of a tax rate reduction, okay? I know that was a lot. There's a lot of layers to that, but I just want to, that's why we have that asterisk there on the 4.6, okay? This is sort of our understanding of this hold harmless as we sit here today, okay? That it's going to offset some of the losses of a potential tax rate reduction, but we're awaiting sort of final confirmation from the agency on that. Okay.
And that would, by August, when we adopt our tax rate, that would be defined at that point?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
I want to make a comment just to make sure that the team of 8 knows where we're at. So in that slide that's up there, the only reason we're at 1317 is because we swapped the pennies. So then for us just to be transparent with the community, we feel like the starting point for us should be the 0.05 pennies that you're allowed to go through without a tax ratification election. Now, there's been tax compression and it's thrown everything into flux. So then this board can go all the way up to 1317 without having a TRE because we've already had it. But we only had it because we were swapping. So we want the starting point of our workbook that we're going to share with you to be that 0.05 that you're allowed to have just with a majority vote. And then as we're balancing the budget, then we see, okay, do we go to 0.06? Do we go to 0.07? And we'll have those scenarios. But we have to start at 0.05 because it's a transparent thing to do. That's what we could have done without a TRE. Because in a couple of slides, we're going to show you where we're going to have to reinstate the INS tax rate to pay for the bond, which is okay because that's what the state told us to do and that's what we were doing before. So the taxpayers really aren't paying any more taxes, and that's what the state says you got to do anyhow. So the starting point for us is 0.05. And then when we look at salary increases and increase in cost of fuel and everything that we do, well then this board has to say, do we stay at 0.05? Do we go to 0.06? What do we do? Now I know the 4.6 million that he has there at the bottom in loss of revenue, I know that sounds very steep, but we will no longer have to pay for our debt service out of the M&O tax rate, well, not only will we not have to, we're not allowed. And Amy, remind me what our debt service was this year? See, so for that 4.6, you automatically can subtract around let's just say 3.4. So we're only short 1.2 million. So do we make up that 1.2 million by going to 6 cents, 7 cents, or do we do it through reductions? But those are the scenarios that we'll talk about next week. I just don't want that 4.6 million to be devastating to us because we'll no longer pay for debt service out of there. So it's not a bad thing to start at 0.05.
One other thing to mention is that whole spiel I gave about the hold harmless and how that's sort of artificially offsetting some of the losses of going down to the 0.05. That hold harmless, again, was created by the American Rescue Plan. It covers the 21-22 school years and the 22-23 school years. After that, it expires. Okay, so poof, that's gone. Now your real loss of going down to 0.05 does become the 6.3 million. Okay, so you sort of get that 1 year offset through the hold harmless in 22-23, but then that's gone in 23-24 and beyond. And any hope of continuing that would need to come through the form of federal legislation passed by Congress. This is not a state hold harmless.
What's the amount that you said, 6 point?
So
I understand, just I didn't.
yeah, it was 6.3 million.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're looking at around 81, your total M&O revenue in that scenario. If that American Rescue Plan hold harmless wasn't there, you're looking around total M&O revenues of 81 million.
And that's important because we can't lower the tax rate, too much. Well, then later we're going to have to go back and have a TRE to
Right.
increase it.
Yeah. And so
I'm
once
glad you mentioned that.
you're at the 0.1317, if you go down to 0.05, now you're, as Dr. Rios just mentioned, now you're at the point where if you want to increase it above the 5 golden pennies, you got to go out for another TRE or do the disaster pennies again.
I have a question, but I think it's Dr. Rios. So where does Proposition 2 with the homestead exemption going from 25 to 40?
That's like 2 slides down.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
coming up. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
perfect segue. Perfect
Okay.
segue.
I'm sorry.
So actually, I'm going to start in order. But so Prop 1 was the first one that was on the ballot, and both of these passed. Prop 1 passed and Prop 2 passed. Prop 1 is a little bit more complicated to explain, but what it does is it takes all of that tax compression that occurred under House Bill 3, right? You guys went from $1, we're projecting down to 80.46. Your over 65 and disabled homeowners may have not really felt the benefit of that tax compression. Okay, so let's just say, in nice round numbers here, you have an over 65 and disabled homeowner. They've turned 65 many years ago, and their tax levy was locked in at $100. Okay, that's probably not realistic, but just let's suspend our disbelief here for a minute. They were locked in at $100. Okay, that their actual levy on their home may have been $1,000, let's say. Okay, House Bill 3 slowly took that $1,000 levy and maybe reduced it to $900, $800. Okay, that homeowner, that over 65 homeowner, is still just paying $100, right? And so this tax compression that's occurring off to the side, it doesn't really help them at all, right? They don't feel it because they're locked in at $100, and their levy, sort of their nominal levy, is being reduced, but it doesn't impact their frozen amount. Okay, so what Prop 1 does is it takes that levy amount, that $100 levy, and reduces it proportionally in line with all the tax compression that you guys have seen so far. Okay, so now that $100 for them will get compressed down to $80, right? Because you guys have seen roughly a 20% decrease. So that's kind of the back of the napkin way to explain Prop 1. The mechanics on this are going to be a real nightmare for your CADs and your tax assessor collector, and so that's why the legislature delayed the implementation of Prop 1. It's going to impact you on your 23 values. So those are the values that are used to determine your aid and your funding for the 23-24 school year. As I note there, it does include state aid to offset you. So it'll provide it'll provide a new hold harmless in the system where you guys would potentially get additional state aid to offset any of that property tax loss. Okay, so on a net basis, there's no impact. There will be no impact to your sort of net revenue from Prop 1. Prop 2 is much simpler to explain. That just increases the resident homestead exemption from $25,000 to $40,000. Okay, so everyone that sort of is living in their has their primary residence, they qualify for a resident homestead exemption, and they get $40,000 just lopped off their property value right off the top. Okay, and that's what Prop 2 did. It brought it up to $40,000. Again, you have there is a hold harmless provision in Prop 2, so the state will make you whole from the impact of Prop 2. And there's one caveat, however, to that. The hold harmless is on the M&O and INS side. However, on the INS side, it's not going to cover any new bonds you go out and issue. Okay, so if you issue a bond after September 1, 2021, then that bond will essentially become a little bit more expensive to levy, right? Because your property tax base got smaller, and so to service that same level of debt, you'd have to levy a higher tax rate. Okay, and so that's roughly the implications and consequences of Prop 2. But generally speaking, for y'all, and I think we've run some numbers on this, on the impact of Prop 2 for y'all. It's a net, at least for now, it's you break even. There's no, you're not harmed by it, you're not hurt by it. Okay, you still get the same amount of funding. It will you'll only have a negative impact on future bond issuances. And speaking of bonds, this is the last slide. We're going to touch a little bit on debt service.
I'm sorry. So sorry. So in working with the administration and Mo Casey, he did have a slide to talk about the optional homestead exemption that we have, which is 20%. So everybody's going to get 40,000, but above that we give 20%. In just about all cases, the optional homestead exemption that we give is higher than $40,000 off the top, because the average property value in Del Rio is $200,000. I'm not saying that's what it is. If it is, and you take an optional homestead exemption of $40,000, that leaves you $160,000. Well, then you still take 20% off the $160,000, and that's going to, in a lot of cases, it's going to be right at the $40,000 or higher. But we're going to talk about that next week, so that we can give you different scenarios with the INS tax rate that he's going to talk about here in a minute, and then the possibility of going to 5%, 6%, 7%. But just know that piece is missing, because we wanted to get through this first. It really is a lot of information. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
Switching gears here to the debt service, the first two bullet points kind of address the district's history with the swap and drop, and why you did that, and the rationale for that, and then how House Bill 1525 kind of changed the rules of the game, unfortunately. And so because of that, generally we're advising districts to levy an INS rate that, in combination with the state aid you receive, allows you the resources to fully service your debt. Okay, so INS tax collections plus INS state aid should be enough to make your debt payments for the year. Okay, and so that's sort of the world we live in post House Bill 1525. So because of that, generally we advise districts to work with their financial advisor to sort of finalize the INS rate. We are not financial advisors at Mo Casey, but we do know, school funding and state aid, so sometimes we pretend to be financial advisors. But generally speaking, we think that given all those assumptions we talked about earlier, your ADA, your property value, you're looking at around a 12 to 13 cent increase in your INS rate to get you to the point where your INS tax collections and your INS state aid, those two things together are enough to pay your required debt service for the next year. One quick note about local optional homestead exemptions. I know we're going to talk about it in more detail, but just to put this, to provide a little bit of context, decisions about local optional homestead exemptions need to be made by July, okay? And so that, the timeline on that is a little bit different than your tax rate, okay? So just keep that in mind if you are considering making changes to your local optional homestead exemption, currently set at 20%. As Dr. Rios said, you, as a board, you have sort of full control over that. It doesn't need to go to the voters or anything, but you do, or you're statutorily required to make a decision by July, okay? And the other thing to mention there is that the state doesn't really recognize that value loss from the local optional homestead exemption, okay? So that exemption sort of hurts you when the state comes time to calculate your funding, okay? So sort of winding that back not only would bring you tax collections, but it could also increase state aid, okay? Because the state kind of ignores the fact that you have a local optional homestead exemption. So, and we can kind of go into the numbers on all that next time, but those are sort of the basic mechanics and timelines if you are making those considerations. Yeah.
Dr. Rios?
So two questions.
Yeah.
We know that we have to announce or the board has to vote if they choose to reduce or remove the local.
Or just
optional
change it,
reserves.
yeah, right, yeah.
Just change it.
Yeah.
But with the passage of Proposition 2, that doesn't make this a one-time deal. We can do it any July. So if they choose not to reduce
Correct,
it this year,
yes.
they can still revisit that before July of
yeah.
2023.
And then it would apply for that year, yeah, yeah. So you need to do it the July of that,
So it's not a one-time thing. We'll still continue to have that opportunity.
Yes, each year you can
Okay.
revisit that, yeah.
Awesome. So then next week, I know that we're going to keep working with you on the different scenarios.
Mhm.
So next week, are you just providing them, or are you making the trip back over here?
I'd be happy to make the trip back down here if you'd like. You got a nice facility here. I got an iced tea out, and I bought one, and two came out. So if you guys keep up with that hospitality, I'll come back. Yeah. But yeah, I'd be happy to.
It's just that next week, when we start talking about the different scenarios and tax rates
Yeah.
and INS and local optional homestead exemptions, I just know that there's going to be a lot of meetings. And even though every day that we talk about this, we've learned more, even tonight with just your conversation, it just allows us to synchronize it more.
Yeah.
So it's your presence is very valuable.
Yeah, and after being virtual for years, I'm excited to come back and visit in person. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
I'll open it up for questions from board members, if you have any. Questions?
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
I'm just so happy that the state aid will be coming in to compensate and kind of even
Yes.
out everything.
Yeah, yeah. So that was something that wasn't originally in the bill, but us, MoKC and other public education advocates in Austin fought to get that added. So yeah,
Glad to
we
hear
were
that.
excited about that as well.
No
Thank you.
questions? Thank you very much. Have a
you.
safe trip. Okay, we will adjourn our workshop and go into our regular meeting. And we go down to item G1, consideration to approve, it's on the consent agenda, consideration to approve payment contract over $5,000 with school therapy services in the amount not to exceed $26,000, funding source general funds for additional occupational therapy to complete the 21-22 academic school year. Ida Gomez. It's a consent agenda, so there's some information behind that.
It is a consent, but since it's the only item, if you wanted just to give a brief statement on it, she's prepared to do that.
Okay.
Good evening, President Mesa, Dr. Rios, and members of the board. This contract comes to you as a request for approval. We still have some students who need to be assessed for occupational therapy and/or services. This is a vendor that has done business with us before, but because the cost is not to exceed $26,000, but it is over $5,000, we do bring it to you for approval.
So these students will be, again, assessed for the coming year?
No, sir, it's still part of the 21-22 school
Okay.
year. We still have some pending assessments to complete.
Okay.
These would be completed before the end of June.
Questions from board members? Recommendation?
It's a consent agenda,
Oh.
sir.
Okay, well, that's the only item on the consent agenda?
Yes.
Then I'll make a motion, I'll request for a motion from a board member to approve the consent agenda. Motion made by Mr. Galindo, seconded by Mrs. Webb. All those in favor? Motion carries
Thank you.
unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item we have is under 12, Administration, 12A. Consideration to ratify the amendment of Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, between the City of Del Rio and San Felipe Del Rio Consolidated Independent School District for the development of a park to be located within the Ceniza Hills Elementary School. Sandra Hernandez.
Mr. Mesa, I'll speak to it, and I'll ask Ms. Hernandez to read the recommendation. Last month, we brought the recommendation to approve the MOU, and the board approved it. The verbiage from the MOU that the city approved and the one that the board approved is slightly different, and it specifically had that the MOU the board approved had a time limit of 50 years. The MOU that the city approved didn't have a time limit, means it would continue, but of course, there is a process to terminate it, should either side want to do that. The change is substantive in that it does have a term limit, but it's not anything that changes the price or anything that we had agreed on. So we just wanted the board to ratify that small change to the MOU it's already approved, and then we move on as we had planned before, with
So
no added charges.
Basically just eliminating the 2072, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, and that MOU is in your booklet here, so, yeah, if anyone has a question, now would be the time to ask. Okay, no questions, then recommendation, please.
Yes, sir. It is a recommendation of the administration that the Board of Trustees ratify the amended memorandum of understanding and authorize the superintendent of schools to sign the document as presented.
Thank you very much. You've heard the recommendation. I'll entertain a motion for approval. Motion made by Mrs. Gonzalez, seconded by Mrs. Chavez. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The time is 7:49 PM. We're going into closed session permitted by sections 551.074 and 551.071. We're now in closed session. Okay, the time is 9:14 PM. We're reconvening into open session. No action was taken in executive. We're down to item 20A, discussion, possible action, personnel report. Aide Garcia.
Good evening again. It is the recommendation of administration that the Board of Trustees approve the resignations, vacancies, and following new personnel. Myra Retana, pre-kindergarten teacher at Irene Cardwell Elementary. Vanessa Salazar, fourth grade teacher at Dr. Fermin Calderon Elementary.
Thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion for approval. Motion made by Amy, seconded by Ms. Chavez. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
You did. Go, Becky. You did.
Yes.
Oh, okay. There being no other items on the agenda, is there a motion for adjournment? Motion made by Mrs. Webb, seconded by Mr. Galindo. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. We are adjourned. Thank you and good night, everyone.